Okay, welcome, good evening, welcome to Parsha Shiur, Mattos, Masei, a double Sedra. Two ideas that I'd like to develop this evening, two really very, very interesting ideas. The first idea is based on a Kli Yakar. Let's take a look at the opening Psukim. Actually, they're not exactly the opening, they're in the second parak of the Parsha, Parak Lamed Aleph in Bamidbar. If you take a look at the first box on the handout, if you're listening online, please email me at j.golker@gmail.com, I'll send you the handout. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe Leimer. So Hashem says to Moshe, Nekaim nikmas b'nei Yisrael me'etz hamijonim. We're familiar with what happened in last week's Sedra, in Balak, that in Pinchas and then previously in Balak, that Bilam curses the Jewish people, his attempts fail, he then gives an eitzah to the Bnei Midjan to seduce the males of Klal Yisrael, and that is how he's going to sort of get to the Achilles heel of Klal Yisrael, as it were. And therefore they'll be able to be cursed and to get punished. And that's what happens in Parshas Pinchas, and 24,000 Jews die. And therefore Hashem says to Moshe, Nekaim nikmas b'nei Yisrael me'etz hamijonim. We need to take revenge against the Midyanim. Achar te'osef el hamecha. And then you, Moshe Rabbeinu, will die. Te'osef el hamecha is an expression of being gathered to your people, is an expression of passing from this world. Moshe Rabbeinu then goes and tells Klal Yisrael the message which he has just received from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But if you look carefully, Moshe Rabbeinu does not relay the message as was told to him. Vayedaber Moshe el ha'am leimer, heicholtzu me'itchem anoshim latzava, prepare for yourselves men for war, v'yiu al Midyan, to go against Midyan, loses nikmas Hashem b'Midyan, to take the nekama of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to take revenge on behalf of HaKadosh Baruch Hu against Midyan. Now that is very strange, because that's not what he was told. He was told, Nekoim nikmas b'nei Yisrael me'etz hamijonim, the Nekom of Klal Yisrael, and he changes it to Nikmas Hashem. What is that about? Furthermore, if you look at the next pasuk, Vayimosru me'alfei Yisrael elef lamate shnei moso elef chalutzei tzova. Vayimosru literally means to hand over. Now that is a strange expression. Hand over suggests that the Bnei Yisrael didn't really want to go to battle. Why not? What is that about? Now, if you look at the first Rashi on Pasuk Gimel, Vaydaber Moshe, Rashi famously says, Afal pisha shoma shemisosei tluya b'dava. Even though Moshe Rabbeinu he knew and he was told, he was just heard that his death is going to follow the battle against Midyan. Also b'simcha v'lo icher. He did it with joy, v'lo icher, and he didn't delay. Straight away, he told Klal Yisrael, etc. We've got to go to battle against Midyan, because he could have delayed. If he knew his death was inevitably going to follow, maybe what's the rush? Don't go straight into battle. Says Rashi, that's not what he did. Also b'simcha v'lo icher. The question is, where does Rashi get this from? How do we know that Moshe Rabbeinu did it b'simcha? Maybe he wasn't b'simcha. Maybe he did it with a very heavy heart. Where does Rashi know that he did it b'simcha? So 3 questions. Let's take a look at the Kli Yakar inside. All of these 3 questions are from the Kli Yakar. Take a look at the second box. Nekaim nikmas b'nei Yisrael me'etz hamijonim. Moshe shina, he changed the order. He changed the instruction. V'omar, and he said, loses nikmas Hashem b'Midyan, to take the nekama on behalf of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'oid kasha, the second question, Shapirish Rashi, Afal pisha shoma Moshe, shemisosei tluya b'dava, also b'simcha v'lo icher. The Rashi I just read. Minole Rashi lemakein. Where does Rashi get this from? How did Rashi know that Moshe Rabbeinu conducted this b'simcha? Maybe he was sad about it. Etc. etc. And lastly, asked the Kli Yakar, when it says that he handed the Jewish people, the army, over against their will. What exactly did Bnei Yisrael not want to go to battle? What's that about? So 3 questions. Why did Moshe Rabbeinu change Hashem's reason for the commandment from Nekoim Nikmas Yisrael to Nekoim Hashem? How did Rashi know that Moshe did this gladly? And V'yimosru suggests they went against their will. Was that really the case? Now, the Kli Yakar goes on and answers the question, but before I share with you his answer, let me remind you about a Kli Yakar that we once did in Parsha Shiur, in Parshas Vayakel, I forget when, a very beautiful Kli Yakar. The Kli Yakar is grappling with the following problem. In Parshas Vayakel, we start off with instructions to keep Shabbos. And then it goes on and talks about the Mishkan. And that is a reverse of the order in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu those two things. Because in the earlier Parsha, Parshas Kisisa, we first have the Mishkan, and then we have Shabbos. And so it changes the order. Now, take a look at the next box. This is the Kliyaka in Shmois Lamatei and Parshas Vayakel. Umashahigdim Parshas Kisisa, in last week's Sedra, says the Kliyaka in Parshas Vayakel. He says that first it was the Mishkan and then Shabbos. Lo moshina Moshe HaSeder. Why did Moshe Rabbeinu change the order? Ki HaKadosh Baruch Hu tzivah tchila al HaMishkan, and Moshe hiktim HaShabbos. Why did he change the order? V'zeh, says the Kliyaka, Ki HaShabbos ein bo im kavod Hashem. Shabbos really talks about the honor that is due to Hashem. L'hoyros ki hu yisparach chidesh elomai. Shabbos really is a testimony to the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, and us keeping Shabbos, making Kiddush, keeping all the halachas, is a praise to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'hamishkan, on the other hand, moire kulei al kvod Yisrael, is referring to the honor due to the Jewish people. Sheviter lohem HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'hishra shchinosa b'soichem u'machal lohem oven ha'egel. The Mishkan follows the sin of the golden calf, and the very fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence now dwells in the Mishkan shows us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has forgiven us for the sin of the chet of the egel. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, now, in any good relationship, each person should be thinking about the other person. When each person is thinking about themselves, it's a recipe for disaster. But if each individual is thinking about the other person, that's a recipe for success. Therefore, says the Kliyaka, 2 lines from the bottom to the end of that middle box, HaKadosh Baruch Hu chos yoyes al kvodim Yisrael. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is always worried about us. Al Kain hiktim ha-mishkan. He therefore starts straight away with the Mishkan, which is a reference to the Kavod of Klal Yisrael, and then he talks about Shabbos, which is about himself. Avul Moshe choshav l'shelichvoida Hashem Yisbarach. He's shelichoved Hashem Yisbarach. He's talking about the honor to Hashem. Roi lahaktim ha-Shabbos. He therefore is focusing on Kodesh Baruch Hu. He starts with Shabbos, Hamoira Kvoda Yisbarach, which is talking about the Kavod and the honor due to Hashem. Va'achakach ha-Mishkan, and then he talks about the Mishkan, Hamoira Kvodim Shel Yisrael. So it says the Kliyakar. I'll explain to you the difference. In Parshas Kisisa, it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu talking. He is focusing on Klal Yisrael, and therefore he begins by talking about the Mishkan. And then he talks about Shabbos. Masha Enken in Parshas Vayakel, when Moshe Rabbeinu is talking, he begins with Shabbos, which is the honor, reflection of the symbolism of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's honor. That's his priority. And then he talks about the Mishkan, which gives honor to the Jewish people. And that's really a theme that the Kedushas Levi famously develops. That the Gemara says, this is a Kedushas Levi in Parshas Bay. The Gemara says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wears tefillin. So the Gemara says, Ma kosuv, what's written on the tefillin of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? So the Gemara says, written on HaKadosh Baruch Hu's tefillin is Mi ka'amcha Yisrael. Who is like your people, Klal Yisrael? Goy echad ba'aretz. What's written on our tefillin? Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. On our tefillin, we're focusing on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu's tefillin is focusing on us. That also, says the Kedushas Levi, explains another interesting discrepancy. We talk about the Yontef of Pesach as Pesach. That's how we would all talk. What are your plans for Pesach? Are you making Pesach? Are you ready for Pesach? Pesach, Pesach, Pesach. The Torah doesn't call it that. The Torah calls it Chag HaMatzos. So why do we call it Pesach and the Torah calls it Chag HaMatzos? Says the Kedushas Levi as follows. We focus on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu focuses on us. We call it Pesach because we remember the chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Asher Posach, Abotim Mitzrayim. He jumped over the Jewish homes and smote the Bechorim of the Mitzrayim. So we call it Pesach, he passed over, that's what we call it, because we focus on the chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu focuses on the chesed that we did. What was the chesed that we did? Lech teich acharai b'midbar be'eretz le'zorua. We went out into this huge expanse of a midbar without water, without food, without nourishment. That took a lot of faith. Therefore, he calls them the matzahs, those little pieces of dough that we put on our backs, and we just marched out into Mitzrayim, into the midbar. HaKadosh Baruch Hu very fondly recalls that. So therefore, we call it Pesach because we refer to Hashem's kindness, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu's word calls it Chag HaMatzos. It's a reciprocal relationship. That's the Hakdama. Says the Kliyakar, the same thing. Hashem is concerned With Klal Yisrael's honor, we're concerned with Hashem's honor. What does that mean? Take a look at the bottom box. Ubir Hadova, the explanation is this. Shahamidyanim shtayim ro'is asu. The Midyanim did two evils against Klal Yisrael. Well, two evils stam. Achas l'shamayim, one was against HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ki hechetiu es Yisrael ba'avodah zarah v'znus. He caused the Jewish people to do Averas. So therefore, that was an affront, that was a sin against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Averas are being done. Avodah zarah. Va'achas Yisrael, the second evil that Midyan did was against Klal Yisrael. Ki yipilu ba'atzosom esrim va'aba elef Yisrael. He caused 24,000 Jews to die. Va'amar Kodesh Baruch Hu Moshe, and therefore Hashem says to Moshe, "Nekaim nikmas b'nei Yisrael." Take revenge for the damage done to Klal Yisrael. 24,000 Yidden were killed. Ki mashe osuli, because the affront to me, shari yomachol. I'm okay to be meichel the affront to me, says HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'ikha nekama mashe osuli Yisrael ki rabba rasam, and the ikha nekama should be to take revenge for what was done for Klal Yisrael. Next paragraph. V'kasher shama Moshe, and when Moshe Rabbeinu heard she'amar Hashem achar te'osef el amecha, that as soon as you vanquish Midyan, you are going to be killed. V'kvar yoda Moshe reiv chibas Yisrael l'manhigam, and Moshe Rabbeinu knew that Klal Yisrael loved him. Omar beliboy im omer Yisrael dvarim ka'havyosam. If I repeat the instructions of HaKadosh Baruch Hu verbatim, kasher nem relim mipnei agura, like it was said to me from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, knowing that my death, says Moshe Rabbeinu, is contingent, is going to happen immediately after this revenge is taken. In Cain, Yomer Na Yisrael, Klal Yisrael are going to say, Kashem Shemochel HaKadosh Baruch Hu Al Chelkai, just like Hashem has sort of been, is forgiven the affront to him, Kach Anachnu Nimchel Lohem Al Masha Osolonu, we'll forgive our thing, and therefore, V'lo Nevakesh Nekama Kol Kach, Mehira, we're not in such a big hurry to take revenge. Hashem has been Meichel, we've been Meichel, therefore there's no hurry. Everyone's been Meichel, there's not such a big rush anymore. Moshe, therefore, last paragraph. Moshe Rabbeinu knows what the Ratzon Hashem is. Hashem says, you've got to fight Midyan. He therefore wanted to do the Ratzon Hashem to fight against Midyan. That was his deep felt desire. And therefore, he was worried that if he would repeat the words of HaKadosh Baruch Hu verbatim, Klal Yisrael are going to delay. He doesn't want to delay the Ratzon Hashem. So therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu changed the order and said, Nekaim nikmas Hashem, because it's Hashem's honor at stake here. Klal Yisrael have got no wiggle room. They've got to go straight away. And that's why it says Vayimosru, because they weren't keen to do it, because they didn't want to lose their leader. And therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu changed from Nikmas Yisrael to Nikmas Hashem. They had to do it without delay. That's the Ratzon Hashem, because Hashem says, take revenge for me. Umikan Raya Berura says the Kliyaka she'also moipa simcha v'lo yicher. That's your Raya that Moshe Rabbeinu did it for simcha and he didn't delay. Because he could have delayed if he wanted to, but he didn't. Because his overriding objective was to do the Ratzon Hashem properly and quickly. So we've now answered our three questions. What were our three questions? Why did Moshe Rabbeinu change Hashem's reason for the commandment? How did Rashi know that Moshe did this gladly? What's V'yimosru? The answer to all of this is that Klal Yisrael is worried about Hashem, Hashem is worried about Klal Yisrael. The instruction of Hashem was, when Midyan acted in last week's Parsha, there were two evils to what they did. One was against Klal Yisrael, 24,000 people died, and one was against HaKadosh Baruch Hu, creating Avodah Zarah against Hashem, rebelling against Hashem. So therefore Hashem says, look, my part, I'm Meichel the Avodah Zarah, but I'm worried about you, Klal Yisrael. 24,000 Yidden died. So therefore Hashem says the instruction to Moshe Rabbeinu was, Nekaim nikmas b'nei Yisrael. But Moshe Rabbeinu could have relayed that as well. But he was worried. If he would relay that as well, he would say, so you see Hashem's been Meichel his chelek. So Klal Yisrael will say, we'll be Meichel our chelek, there'll be no rush, and we'll keep Moshe Rabbeinu. And he'll be in the world longer. But Moshe Rabbeinu was aware of that. He knew that he was a popular leader. And therefore, he changed the order and said, Nekoim Nikmas Hashem, because he wanted Klal Yisrael to fulfill the Ratzon Hashem straight away, and therefore that answers how Rashi knew that Moshe Rabbeinu did this gladly. And that explains Vayimosru. In fact, Rashi in Pasuk Hey says that. Vayimosru, he handed them over, which implies a certain reticence. Until they mosru al karchan, until he handed the people over to go into battle. So a very beautiful kliyaka. Okay, let's press on. The next idea appears in the very end of Parshas Mattos, the first of the two Sedras. And Klal Yisrael are now, the Gad and Reuven and Chatzi Shevet Menashe on Eva HaYarden, and they're beginning to capture various lands on Transjordan on the other side of the Yarden. It says the Pasuk Mem Aleph in Perek Lamed Beis, V'Yair ben Menashe holach v'yilkod es chavoseihem. He captured certain villages, v'yikra esen Chavos Yair, and he called these towns Chavos Yair. Next Pasuk, V'Noivach holach v'yilkod es Knas. Noivach, another person of Shevet Menashe, went and captured a place called Kanos and B'Noseha and the sort of surrounding towns by Yikra Lo Noivach Bishmoi, and he called the town Noivach, named after himself. Okay, those are the final two psukim in Parshas Mattos. Now, Rashi points out Vayikra Lo Noivach, for those grammarians amongst you, Vayikra Lo Noivach, that Lo should have a mapik hay, should have a dot in it to make it hard. Says Rashi, but you don't find the mapik hay in it. Lo eino mapik hay. Why not? I saw, says Rashi, in the writings of Moshe Hadarshan, he quotes often, because this place, Novach, it didn't last very long. And therefore, to connote the fact that Novach did not stay in his possession for very long, it's without a hey, which is a lashon rafa, a softer, weaker expression. Shemashma midrasha kamay loy, like loy novach. It's not going to be novach, i.e., you're not going to have it for very long. What is going on? What is that all about? So I came across a magnificent idea of Rav Shimon Schwab. He's got a sefer Me'ein Beis HaShoeva, but again, I need to give it a bit of a hagdama. A story. A fellow came from New York to the Briskerov. This is in the 1950s. So he went to the Briskerov, and one of the Gedolim in Eretz Yisrael, and he said Shalom Aleichem to him. So the Briskerov said to him, Shalom Aleichem, who are you, what's your name? So he told him his name, and I live in New York, and I'm a lawyer. I'm a lawyer from New York. And tell me, what do you do? So he said, I'm a lawyer. From New York. Yeah, but who are you? My name is so-and-so, I'm a lawyer from New York. So, and again he asked the question, but who are you? And he repeated. So the Briskerov said to him, I didn't ask you how HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives you parnasa. I asked you, who are you? And we all do this. We define ourselves by our jobs. That's who we are. Just think about talk, conversation at a kiddush, a reception, in the street, whatever. We define ourselves by our work. So the Briskerov was saying to this fellow, you may be a lawyer from New York, but that's not who you are. That's just how you earn your parnasa. That explains a medrash in Parshas Noach. Noach begins life in the beginning of Parshas Noach. Eile told us Noach ish tzadik tomim hoy b'derosov. He's given tremendous appellations. Tzadik, ish tzadik. But he ends the Parsha with a different description. Vayochel Noach ish ha'adoma. He starts life as ish tzadik, and he ends the Parsha as ish ha'adoma, a man of the field, a man of agriculture. In contrast, Moshe Rabbeinu begins his life, his journey. That's when he sort of runs away from Mitzrayim, and he encounters the daughters of Yisro. V'atoimarna ish Mitzri hitzilonu miyad haroim. An Egyptian, Ish Mitzri, saved us from the Roim. At the end of Torah, in Parshas V'zois HaBracha, it says V'zois HaBracha sheberach Moshe ish v'elokim. So Noach starts off ish Sadik, he ends up ish v'adoma. Moshe Rabbeinu starts off ish Mitzri and ends off as ish v'elokim. A different trajectory, different journeys. And the Medrash notes this. The Medrash in Noach, Chaviv Moshe min Noach, says the Medrash, Moshe Rabbeinu was more precious than Noach Because Noach Misha Nikra Ish Sadik, Nikra Ish Adama. He started off Ish Sadik and then he went to Ish Adama. Of Moshe Misha Nikra Ish Mitzri, Nikra Ish Olekim. He went the other way. Now, the difficulty is that Noach, is it true to say he started Ish Sadik and he ended Ish Adama? He was a farmer from the outset. In fact, in Parshas Bereshis, before we even begin the Parshas Noach, and we talk about Ish Sadik, look at the last psukim in Bereshis, in the middle box. When Noach is born in Perek Hey in Parshas Bereshis, it says, Vayikro es Shemoi Noach, Leimar Zei Nachamenu Ma'asenu Me'itzven Yodeinu. What does that mean? So Rashi explains, Yonach Mimenu es Itzven Yodeinu, he will make life easier for us. Lashon of Noch. What does that mean? There was no agricultural equipment. You had to plow the field with your hands. Noach invented the plow and agricultural tools. It was a hard work. But things got easier in the times of Noach. I.e., Yonach Mimenu, he will give us rest. Right? That's what it means. He will give us rest. He will make our lives easier. That's what Noach means. So you see that he was a farmer from the outset. So what does it mean in the Medrash? He started life as a tzaddik and then he became Ish Adama. He was Ish Adama from the very outset as well. So the explanation is this. After the Mabul, agriculture, farming, became his primary focus. That became the sort of the raison d'etre of Noach. Previously, he was a tzaddik who happened to be involved in agriculture. So it's true to say that Noach was Ish Tzaddik who happened to be involved in agriculture. He was a tzaddik who happened to be a lawyer from New York, or whatever it may be, but that's not what defined him. Later in life, he's called Ish Adama because that defined him, that's who he was. Moshe Rabbeinu, on the other hand, began Ish Mitzri and became Ish Olekim. Now, perhaps the most articulate expression of this is in Sefer Yonah. We lay, of course, on Mincha in the afternoon on Yom Kippur, when Yonah is running away from HaKadosh Baruch Hu and he's hiding, sleeping in the ship, and the ship encounters a terrible storm, and the sailors come down into the hold and they say to this fellow sleeping, "Vayomer Elov Hagido Nolanu Ma Malachtecha." Who are you? What's your work? Where did you come from? A series of questions. And Yonah answers, Vayoma Aleihem Ivri Onechi. I'm Jewish. Ich bin a Yid. Ves Hashem Lekem Hashemayim Ani Yorei. Right? My dear cousin and friend, Rabbi David Tugendhaft, his status on WhatsApp is Ivri Onechi Es Hashem Lekem Hashemayim Ani Yorei. Beautiful status. Got another friend, his status is, in a meeting, please disturb. Right? So everyone's got their own statuses, right? But that's his status. Ivri Onechi Ves Hashem Elokei Hashemayim Ani Yorei. Now, what do we see? So that's the intro. I.e., some people, they're defined by their work, and that is not always a good thing. Says Shimon Schwab, a beautiful piece, bottom box. Hine. Kol Nukuda Shebatayra He limit. Every dot in the Torah, every mapik hey, everything in the Torah is teaching a lesson. Ayin Menachas Chavtes on the base. Check out the Gemara Menachas on the Chavtes on the base. Rabbi Kiva Darash Akol Koitz for Koitz Tilin Tinish Halachas. Famous Gemara that Rabbi Kiva would darshan every crown on every letter, piles and mountains of halachas. Right? Everything can be darshaned, can be explained. It's there for a reason. V'chein, and so too. The lack of something is also darshanable, i.e. not having the mapikei also begs a question. Why? What's it teaching? What is the Torah teaching us that the name Noach didn't last? But the Chavis Yoed did last in contrast. If you go forward many centuries, you will find the reference to Chavis Yoed. So how striking. So two questions asked of Shimon Schwab. In our Parsha, at the end of Mattos, what is the limud of that Vayikra Lo Novach There's no mapikei to suggest loy novach that it didn't last. What's it telling me? And moreover, chavis yoeh did last many centuries. You see it in Sefer Shoftim, and novach didn't last. What's that about? Says Rav Shimon Schwab, beautiful. V'nireh, ki ha'adam sheyesh lo nechasim. If a person has property, has assets, heim nikroim al shema, nechasim al shema, they can be called after him. That's okay. Aval heim dvarim shechutz legufoi. They are sort of extrinsic to him. They're not part of him. They're external to him. It's not, doesn't define him. It's not who he is. That's okay. You can call them the villages of Yair. That area is his. He doesn't call that town Ir Novach or Chavos Novach or whatever. He actually calls them Novach. That is him. That's who he is. I am my property. I am my assets. That is not a Torah way of looking at things. And therefore it doesn't have lasting impact. It's not enduring. They won't last. So therefore, says Rav Shimon Schwab, Novach, so identified with his assets and with his property, he called the property not the villages of, but he called it Novach, end of. That's who I am. That is not a Torah hashkafa. Therefore, it takes out the hey, it's read, pronounced lo Novach, this is not going to last. Masha'enkin chavis yair, that's okay, you can call it the villages of, that's identification, that just tells me who it belongs to, that's okay. It's extrinsic to him. And therefore, chavis yair lasted, and you see it feature many centuries later in Sefer Shoftim. Very, very beautiful idea of Shimon Schwab. So there we have two ideas to think about. The concept of the Kli Yakar, why Moshe Rabbeinu changes from Nekoim Nikmas Bnei Yisrael to Nikmas Hashem, how Rashi knows that Moshe went into battle gladly, even though he knew his death was going to follow immediately after battle, how Rashi knew that, and how the Vayimosru handed over does indeed imply that Klal Yisrael did not want to go to battle because they didn't want to lose their leader, and that's when Moshe Rabbeinu was aware of that, and therefore changed the order in order to do the Ratzon Hashem. Very beautiful idea of the Kli Yakar. And then the second idea of why the Mapik Hey in Vayikra Lo Novach, to connote, to explain the Rashi of Lo is Kamoi Lo, as if it was not. As in it's a lashon of Rafa, of soft, of weak, that Novach is not going to last. Why not? And Chavos Yair lasted. The answer is because Novach was too materialistic. He was so caught up in his property and his materialism that he called it not in reference to, but it was him. This is who I am. I am Novach. These are my village. This is Novach. And therefore it was criticized, and therefore this is not a Torah Shkofa, says Rav Shimon Schwab, and therefore it was taken away from him. That's why the contrast, that's the criticism of Noach. Even though he was involved in agriculture from the early days, he was not criticized for that, but there's nothing wrong with that. He was a tzaddik who happened to be involved in agriculture. But later he identified with his land so much that he was called Ishra Doma as a criticism of him, because he too much identified with his work. And in contrast, as Moshe Rabbeinu became the Ish Elokim. And ultimately, that is the message of Yonah. That's Ivri Onechi, that's who I am. And that's the answer to all of these questions. Very beautiful idea of Shimon Schwab. Okay, we'll leave it there.